What is
100,000
the question is, what is the how do we measure how successfully we were able to optimize?
other watching things on the wall.
Exactly. Other than exactly, which doesn't. It's called benchmarking. For benchmarking, you would probably write another client, and which would execute a substantial amount of those checks in a loop, and simply basically check the time before and after, and determine how many milliseconds or seconds or hours it took, and then try another version and compare the difference on that particular platform. And hopefully you can check it on Linux and Windows and 32-bit and 64-bit machines, and then you can essentially argue about how much improvement really took place by replacing an unoptimized with an optimized version.
Quick follow-up.
Mhm.
If I were going out and doing a disk retrieve, I'd know that maybe it took, well, back in the day, it took a tenth of a second, for instance.
Sure.
And difference between that and going back and doing it in memory would be substantial. I
Correct.
could calculate it that way, but is there a way to calculate how long these loops would take?
Absolutely. You can obtain the system clock before and after, and then just compute the difference. To this very program will be asking the clock before I start this test, give me the value of the system clock in terms of like milliseconds with some granularity, and then run the test, and then ask the system clock for the value at that time, and basically compute the difference.
Last follow-up. I mean, is there a standard, let's say, number, let's say all the statements, are worth point 10 nanosecond or whatever it is, and, yeah, and each
Uh,
statement that does this at a certain,
It depends on the architecture. The granularity of the clock and those measurements is a different story. The locality of these, if you execute 1 million loops through the code, hopefully that will be sufficient to neglect all these, rough spots in terms of how accurate the clock value is.
thank you.
Let's move on. Thank you. Thank you for the questions. So this was somewhat unorthodox, I guess, introduction to the for loop, because we've done this work with, our condition is somewhat you know longer than just x less than 5 or something like that, and we had this increment statement that instead of saying plus 1 says plus 2, and we actually found a way for initializer that makes sense, because originally we started with 2, but then said, oh, actually, before we start looping, let's go to 3 and beyond, and also look only at the odd numbers. So now that I still remember it, let's compare the for loop and the while loop. I will probably just code in another public example of a public static void method that doesn't return anything, named dummy, I guess, and it doesn't take any parameters. So just an example of some code. So here I have my for loop. Let me say integer, and this time, to really keep the syntax as simple as possible, for that only reason, I will use a single character variable x. In all other cases, please, and submitting homeworks, do not use single character variables. I know you can copy and paste the codes from some website, and they may be using a lot of single character variables for whatever reason. I disagree with that very strongly. But if you do, change that, okay? At least change that, because at some point it's not going to make me very happy. All right, so in the while loop, I can say for as long as x is less than 3, um, actually, how about 13, not 3, so that gives us a little bit more space for going through the loop. Very kind of silly idea. System out print print x. So we're printing the numbers between like 1 and 12, right? I'm sorry, 0 and 12. That's the intent. But saying um, if x equals 6, skip this number, and to skip the number, I will say continue. Okay? I will say continue. And I will skip this number. At as I go in, I guess I can just simply say x equals x plus 1. No, I'm sorry. Let's do it this way. X equals x plus 1. This code has a significant problem. Because when I say continue, right? My intent is to continue the loop because I simply wanted to skip number 6. I didn't want to print number 6. I wanted to print everything but number 6. So I said, okay, I'd like to continue my loop, but if x is 6, don't do it, don't print it. Very simple idea. But then I'm caught in the endless loop because I'm no longer executing this statement at the bottom, which is specifically designed to increment x, go to the next value, go check the condition again. As long as condition true, continue looping, right? However, so this is a huge problem. Innocent idea, but the problem is with this. So that's where an advice is to, instead of using the while loop, when you have a clearly visible and accessible and conceptually direct variable that controls the execution of the loop, we name it loop control variable. And when it's an integer number and it can be incremented or decremented, in that case, the advice is use for loop, right? So in the for loop, what you would do is to say, okay, x equals 0. I'm sort of like, using existing already variable. Of course, this is our initialization statement. It executed only once before the loop, never after or never when the iteration have already started. That's why my preference is, as I said before, to keep my initialization statement actually right at the top of for loop. It's your choice. Many people like to do it inside those parentheses. Then here is my condition, which is exactly the same. X is less than 13. And then my increment statement is x plus 1. Okay, and inside the loop, I am doing my thing, which is if x is 6, don't do it, otherwise print, right? So the two loops, and in this case, not a problem is the appropriate comment, because the increment statement is executed every time you loop back to the top of your loop, right? So this continuous, the availability of continuous statement makes while and for loop fundamentally different because the dynamics are obviously different, right? Agree? Yes, no? Question?
Yeah. So why not just simply put, thank you, in the while loop, put the increment up at the top, like you were going
That's
to.
a workaround, sure. Yeah, do it
And
this way.
I think you, although you've got it set at x equals 0, if it were some other number, wouldn't you want to have it one less than the number you want to start on?
Well, you can control it with Yeah, you can control it with like um,
Because you're incrementing immediately. So in this case,
no, no, no. I am incrementing only at the end. So I
well,
do start with a 0. The increment statement is not
I don't mean in the
executed
for
before
loop,
first.
I mean in the workaround of putting in the while loop, putting the increment at the beginning.
Yes, but if I did that, that that would not demonstrate the problem there,
No, I understand
or
that.
the difference.
But I'm
Yes,
saying that
but
they would be equal.
is this
if
a solution? Yeah, then you make them equal, but
You have to decrement.
someone has to still worry about it. Someone has to still. I will. Okay, actually, let me save this segment and comment on this because I think it's an excellent point.